There's something profoundly haunting about watching someone who has lived with such unbridled passion suddenly pause and acknowledge the ticking clock. When Joanna Lumley, the woman who has danced through 7 decades of life with champagne in one hand and a passport in the other, looks into the camera and says she doesn't have much time left, the world stops spinning for just a moment. But here's what makes this story different from every other celebrity confronting mortality tale you've heard. This isn't about fear, regret, or desperate last-minute attempts to leave a legacy. This is about a 79-year-old British icon who has decided to live every remaining day as if it's the last glass of champagne at the most fabulous party Earth has ever thrown, and who's inviting all of us to understand what that really means. Picture this scene from a recent interview. Joanna Lumley, sitting with the posture of a queen and the mischievous glint in her eye that made Patsy Stone iconic, casually mentions that her time must be coming soon. Not with sadness, not with desperation, but with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that comes from someone who has truly lived. She speaks about mortality the way most people discuss their weekend plans. She admits she wouldn't mind an assisted death if she reached a miserable state where talking or eating became impossible. She describes herself as being near the top of the hill, acknowledging that gravity works only one way from that summit. But in the same breath, she talks about her daily champagne ritual, her refusal to worry about health, and her philosophy of treating each sunrise as a gift that shouldn't be squandered on anxiety or regret. This contradiction, this simultaneous acceptance of death and celebration of life, is what makes Joanna Lumley's approach to her inevitable end so compelling, so unusual, and so utterly worth examining in detail. To understand where Joanna Lumley is now, staring down the final chapter of what has been an extraordinary life, we need to travel back to where it all began. On May 1, 1946, in the breathtaking mountain region of Kashmir, a baby girl was born to Major James Rutherford Lumley of the Gurkha Rifles and his wife Thyra. The location itself reads like something from a romantic novel, the kind of exotic beginning that hints at the adventurous life to come. Her father's position with the legendary Gurkha soldiers would later become one of the defining connections of her life, but in those early years, young Joanna was simply a child of the British Raj, experiencing a childhood that moved between the Far East and eventually England as the empire contracted and the world transformed around her family. The transition from Kashmir to England wasn't just a change of geography. It was a shift between worlds, from the vibrant colors and ancient mysteries of India to the gray propriety of post-war Britain. But Lumley carried something with her from those early years, a sense of adventure, a comfort with being different, an appreciation for cultures beyond the British Isles. These weren't just character traits. They were the seeds of what would become a lifetime of boundary crossing, both professionally and personally. While other girls her age were learning to stay within the lines, Lumley was already coloring outside them, dreaming of lives bigger than the narrow expectations British society had for well-bred young women in the 1950s and 60s. Her entry into the public eye came through an unexpected door. In the swinging London of the 1960s, when youth culture was exploding and the city was becoming the creative capital of the world, a young Joanna Lumley found herself drawn into the glamorous world of modeling. This wasn't just about wearing pretty clothes or striking poses for photographers. The modeling scene in 60s London was revolutionary, transforming fashion from something stuffy and exclusive into a form of cultural expression, a way of challenging convention, a statement about modernity and youth. Lumley became one of the most booked models of that explosive decade, working with legendary photographers, gracing magazine covers, and becoming the muse for designer Jean Muir for several years. She wasn't just wearing the clothes of the revolution. She was embodying the spirit of it. But modeling, despite its glamour and the doors it opened, wasn't enough for someone with Lumley's ambitions and range. She wanted to act, to inhabit characters, to tell stories. The transition from model to actress is notoriously difficult. Too many casting directors can't see past the pretty face to the talent that might lie beneath. Lumley faced this prejudice head-on, taking small television roles, building her craft, proving that her beauty was just one tool in a much larger arsenal. For years, she worked steadily but without particular distinction, another talented actress in an industry filled with talented actresses, waiting for that one role that would change everything. That role came in 1976 with the new Avengers, a revival of the iconic 60s spy series. Over 800 girls auditioned for the role of Purdey, the karate-kicking, impossibly cool secret agent. Joanna Lumley won it, and overnight, everything changed. Purdey wasn't just another female sidekick. She was competent, dangerous, stylish, and utterly in control. Her distinctive haircut became instantly iconic, copied by women across Britain. Her physical capabilities, the way she could fight and move, challenged what audiences expected from female characters in action-adventure television. The show made Lumley famous, gave her action hero credentials, and proved she could carry a major series. But interestingly, it wasn't the role that would define her legacy. That was still 16 years in the future. In the meantime, Lumley continued to build one of the most diverse filmographies in British entertainment. She appeared in the science fiction series Sapphire and Steel, creating an otherworldly character that showcased her range. She took dramatic roles, comedic parts, period pieces, contemporary stories. She worked constantly, always choosing interesting projects over safe ones, always willing to take risks. She married twice, first briefly to writer Jeremy Lloyd in the early 70s, then more permanently to conductor Stephen Barlow in 1986, a marriage that has lasted nearly 4 decades and counting. She became a mother, balancing the demands of parenting with the unpredictable schedule of an actor's life. She built a life that was rich and full and authentic, but the role that would cement her place in entertainment history was still waiting in the wings. 1992. That's the year everything changed again. Jennifer Saunders, already famous as one half of the comedy duo French and Saunders, created a new sitcom for the BBC called Absolutely Fabulous. The show centered on Adina Monsoon, a PR agent desperately clinging to relevance in London's fashion and media world. But the character that would steal the show, become an icon, and define an era was Adina's best friend Patsy Stone. Saunders wrote the role specifically with Joanna Lumley in mind, and when Lumley read the script, she understood immediately that this was something special, something dangerous, something that could either crash spectacularly or soar to heights rarely reached by television comedy. Patsy Stone was unlike any character British television had seen before. She was a fashion editor at a major magazine, or at least claimed to be, though she seemed to do very little actual work. She was an alcoholic who began every day with champagne and didn't stop until unconsciousness claimed her. She smoked constantly, took drugs casually, engaged in sex without emotional attachment or apparent enjoyment. She was vain beyond reason, cruel to anyone she considered beneath her, loyal only to Adina, and utterly, completely, hilariously unapologetic about any of it. She was selfish, shallow, often mean, definitely damaged, and somehow, in Lumley's hands, absolutely magnificent. What Lumley did with Patsy was nothing short of alchemy. A lesser actress would have played her as a monster or a victim, but Lumley found something else, a kind of desperate glamour, a tragic determination to keep partying even as the party ended decades ago, a refusal to acknowledge reality that was both delusional and strangely brave. She made Patsy ridiculous and dignified at the same time. She found the hurt underneath the hardness, the fear beneath the bravado, the human being buried under the designer clothes and chemical enhancements. And she made her absolutely hilarious, creating a comic performance that is routinely listed among the greatest in television history. The show ran from 1992 to 2012 with multiple series, reunion specials, and eventually a movie in 2016. Over those 2 decades, Absolutely Fabulous became a cultural phenomenon, quoted endlessly, beloved by celebrities and regular viewers alike, influential far beyond its British origins. And Patsy Stone became inseparable from Joanna Lumley in the public imagination. The role won her multiple BAFTA awards, cemented her status as a national treasure, and created a character that will outlive everyone involved in the show's creation. But here's what's fascinating. While Patsy was drinking champagne all day, being appallingly self-centered, and treating her body like an amusement park with no safety regulations, the real Joanna Lumley was becoming one of Britain's most respected activists and humanitarians. The contradiction between Patsy and Joanna is almost comical. Patsy wouldn't lift a finger to help another human being unless there was champagne or a fashion show involved. Joanna Lumley has spent decades fighting for causes most people won't even notice. She's an advocate for Survival International, working to protect Indigenous peoples and their rights. She supports the Free Tibet campaign, speaking out against oppression when it would be far easier to stay silent. She's passionate about animal welfare, supporting organizations like Compassion in World Farming and becoming a patron of the Born Free Foundation. She's been a vegetarian for over 40 years, long before it was fashionable or easy. She supports over 60 different charities, lending her name, time, and energy to causes ranging from mental health to environmental protection. This is not someone playing at activism for good publicity. This is someone who genuinely cares about making the world better, even as she acknowledges her time in it is running short. But the cause that truly showcased Lumley's power to create change was the Gurkha Justice Campaign. In 2008, she became the public face of a movement to grant settlement rights in Britain to Gurkha veterans who had served in the British military before 1997. These were soldiers who had fought for Britain, bled for Britain, given their youth and often their health to British military campaigns, and yet were denied the right to live in the country they had served. The injustice was obvious, but changing government policy is never easy, especially regarding immigration. It requires public support, media attention, political pressure, and someone with the credibility and determination to keep pushing when doors slam shut. Joanna Lumley was uniquely suited for this fight. Her father had served with the Gurkhas, so this wasn't an abstract cause. It was personal, connected to her own history and identity. She understood the soldiers' culture, respected their traditions, and was genuinely outraged by their treatment. But she also brought something else to the campaign: her celebrity, her media savvy, her ability to command attention and sympathy. She became the face that fronted news programs, gave interviews, met with politicians, and rallied public support. When the government initially rejected the Gurkhas' claims, Lumley appeared on television in tears, not theatrical celebrity tears, but genuine grief and frustration. The public response was overwhelming. The political pressure became impossible to ignore. And in 2009, the government reversed its position, granting Gurkhas the right to settle in Britain. It was an extraordinary victory, the kind of successful activism that rarely happens, where a clear wrong is righted through sustained pressure and public advocacy. Lumley was hailed as a hero, not just by the Gurkhas themselves, but by anyone who believes that those who serve deserve more than empty gratitude. It demonstrated that celebrity activism can be more than performative virtue signaling, that when done with genuine commitment and strategic intelligence, it can actually change lives. And it showed a side of Joanna Lumley that had nothing to do with Patsy Stone's champagne-soaked adventures, a woman of substance, principle, and genuine courage. While building this impressive activism portfolio, Lumley was also establishing herself as one of Britain's most beloved travel documentarians. Starting in the early 2000s, she began making travel shows that took her to some of the world's most fascinating places. She tracked the northern lights across Norway, a lifelong dream finally realized. She traveled the length of the Nile, exploring Africa's great river and the civilizations it has nurtured for millennia. She journeyed across the Silk Road, following ancient trade routes and discovering the connections between East and West. She explored Japan, bringing her enthusiasm and curiosity to a culture that fascinates and confuses many Western visitors. She investigated great cities around the world, not as a tourist, but as someone genuinely interested in understanding what makes each place unique. What made Lumley's travel documentaries different from the countless others filling television schedules was her approach. She wasn't interested in luxury travel or ticking off tourist attractions. She wanted to understand places, meet real people, explore hidden corners, ask genuine questions. She brought the same fearlessness to travel that she'd brought to her acting career, willing to go anywhere, try anything, sleep rough, eat strange foods, put herself in uncomfortable situations if it meant having an authentic experience. She was genuinely interested in other cultures, not as exotic entertainment, but as different ways of being human, equally valid to her own British upbringing. And she brought viewers along on these journeys with enthusiasm and warmth that made you feel like you were traveling with a knowledgeable, adventurous friend rather than watching a celebrity on vacation. These travel shows added yet another dimension to Lumley's public persona. She wasn't just a comic actress and an activist. She was an adventurer, an explorer in the tradition of the great British travelers, carrying forward a legacy that stretched back centuries. And importantly, she was doing this well into her 60s and 70s, at an age when most people are settling into comfortable retirement. She was proving that adventure doesn't have an expiration date, that curiosity shouldn't be contained by age, that the world remains endlessly fascinating no matter how many years you've already spent exploring it. Now, here's where we arrive at the heart of our story. Here is Joanna Lumley at 79 years old, still working, still earning a reported £10,000 per week according to recent company filings, still taking on roles and projects that interest her. She recently appeared in Amandaland, a spin-off from the comedy series Motherland. She continues to make television appearances, give interviews, support her causes. By any objective measure, she is still vital, still relevant, still engaged with life. And yet, she's also begun speaking openly about her mortality in a way that is simultaneously startling and refreshing. In a recent interview, Lumley made the admission that has sparked so much discussion. She doesn't have a lot of time left. She's near the top of the hill, and the journey from here is downward. At 79, the actuarial tables aren't on her side, and she knows it. She's watched friends and colleagues die. She's experienced the loss of people close to her. She understands, in the way that perhaps only people of a certain age truly can, that time is finite, that death isn't some distant theoretical concept but an approaching reality. Most people, facing this knowledge, retreat into fear or denial. They desperately cling to youth through plastic surgery and hair dye and expensive treatments. They become cautious, risk-averse, afraid to do anything that might hasten the inevitable. Or they become morbid, depressed, consumed by the countdown. Joanna Lumley is doing something entirely different. She's embracing what she calls living every day like it's the last. But not in the cliché way that phrase usually implies, not in the sense of reckless bucket list checking or frantic experience collecting. She means something deeper, something more philosophical. She drinks champagne every day, not to excess, not to obliteration, but as a celebration, a small daily acknowledgement that being alive is worth toasting. She doesn't worry about her health in the obsessive way modern culture demands. She's not counting calories, following restrictive diets, or spending hours at the gym trying to add a few extra years to her lifespan. She's made peace with the fact that her body is aging, that it will eventually fail, and that trying to prevent the inevitable is less important than enjoying what remains. In one particularly striking statement, she said she wouldn't mind an assisted death if she reached a miserable state where she couldn't talk or eat without help. This isn't suicidal thinking. It's the opposite. It's someone who loves life so much that she can't bear the thought of existing in a state that isn't really living. She's not afraid of death. She's afraid of the slow degradation that sometimes precedes it, the loss of autonomy and dignity, and the ability to engage meaningfully with the world. And she's courageous enough to say so publicly, to add her voice to the controversial debate about assisted dying, to make people uncomfortable in service of a larger conversation about what it means to die well. This philosophy, this approach to mortality, is remarkable precisely because it's so rare. We live in a culture that treats death as the ultimate failure, the enemy to be fought at all costs, the topic to be avoided in polite conversation. We pump dying people full of treatments that might add a few weeks or months to their lives while destroying whatever quality those remaining days might have had. We warehouse the elderly in care facilities where they're safe and medicated and utterly without purpose or joy. We refuse to have honest conversations about our wishes because talking about death feels like inviting it in. And then we wonder why so many people die badly, in ways they wouldn't have chosen, surrounded by machines instead of loved ones, fighting until the bitter end rather than accepting the natural conclusion of every life. Joanna Lumley is offering a different model. She's showing us that you can acknowledge death without being consumed by it, that you can prepare for the end without giving up on the present, that accepting mortality doesn't mean embracing morbidity, that living well and dying well are connected, two parts of the same fundamental challenge of being human. This isn't nihilism or depression. It's the opposite. It's a deep affirmation of life, a recognition that because time is limited, every moment has value, every experience matters, every relationship deserves our full attention. There's another layer to Lumley's situation that makes it even more poignant. She suffers from prosopagnosia, a neurological condition that affects facial recognition. She has difficulty recognizing people's faces, even those she knows well. Imagine being a celebrated actress, someone whose career has involved studying faces, embodying characters, working intimately with hundreds of different people, and having your brain unable to properly process and remember the human face. She's described it as face blindness, a weird quirk that has been with her for years. It's not life-threatening, not progressive in the way that would shorten her lifespan, but it's a reminder of the brain's fragility, of how our experience of reality depends on neurological processes we barely understand and can't control. This condition adds a particular dimension to Lumley's reflections on mortality. She's already experiencing a form of cognitive difference, a way in which her brain doesn't work the way most people's do. It's a small preview of the larger cognitive decline that sometimes comes with advanced age, a reminder that the mind, like the body, is subject to deterioration and failure. But rather than letting this condition limit her or define her, Lumley has simply adapted, developed strategies to compensate, and continued living fully. It's yet another example of her fundamental approach to life's challenges. Acknowledge them, adapt to them, but don't let them stop you from engaging with the world. What makes Lumley's current attitude even more fascinating is how it contrasts with the character that made her most famous. Patsy Stone was terrified of aging, spending fortunes and enduring painful procedures to maintain the illusion of youth. She was in complete denial about mortality, living as if the party would never end, as if consequences were something that happened to other people. She was the ultimate cautionary tale about refusing to accept reality, and she was hilarious precisely because we recognized the universal human fear she represented. Joanna Lumley, who inhabited that character so brilliantly for 2 decades, is showing us the opposite approach. She's aging visibly, gracefully, without apology. She's acknowledging that the party does end, that consequences are real, that denial is ultimately more painful than acceptance. The question that naturally arises is, how did Joanna Lumley arrive at this philosophical place? What experiences, what insights, what personal evolution brought her to this point where she can discuss her inevitable death with such equanimity? Part of it surely comes from her childhood, from growing up in diverse cultures, from seeing early in life that there are many ways to be human, many different answers to life's fundamental questions. Part of it comes from her career, from spending decades inhabiting other people's lives, exploring different perspectives, understanding that her own way of seeing isn't the only valid one. Part of it comes from her activism, from fighting for causes larger than herself, from connecting to suffering and injustice in ways that put personal concerns in perspective. But perhaps the biggest influence has been her travel, her determination to keep exploring the world even as she ages. When you've seen the northern lights dance across a Norwegian sky, walked the ancient paths of the Silk Road, sailed the length of the Nile, stood in Japanese temples that have witnessed centuries of human devotion, you gain a perspective that's hard to obtain through ordinary life. You understand viscerally, not just intellectually, that human existence is brief, that civilizations rise and fall, that the planet was here long before us and will be here long after we're gone. This isn't depressing. It's liberating. It frees you from the tyranny of thinking everything depends on you, that your death is some kind of cosmic tragedy rather than the natural transition it actually is. Lumley's approach to her remaining time is also informed by her long vegetarianism and animal welfare advocacy. When you've spent decades thinking about the lives and deaths of other creatures, when you've fought against factory farming and animal cruelty, when you've advocated for treating all sentient beings with respect, you develop a different relationship with mortality. You understand that death itself isn't cruel. It's the natural end of every life, animal and human alike. What's cruel is inflicting unnecessary suffering, denying creatures the ability to live according to their nature, extending existence at the cost of quality. These lessons, learned through advocating for animals, apply equally to human death. The goal isn't to live as long as possible regardless of quality. The goal is to live well for as long as you can, and then to die with as much dignity and control as circumstances allow. There's also something to be said for the British stiff upper lip tradition that Lumley embodies. This isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It's about facing difficulty with grace, not making a fuss, carrying on with dignity. There's a particular British attitude toward death that Lumley represents, a practical acknowledgement that everyone dies, that making a big drama about it doesn't change the reality, that the appropriate response is to keep calm and carry on, even when carrying on means walking toward your own end. This isn't cold or unfeeling. It's a way of maintaining agency and composure in the face of something that could easily overwhelm anyone. Another crucial element of Lumley's perspective is her marriage to Stephen Barlow, now in its 4th decade. Having a stable, loving partnership provides a kind of security that makes it easier to face mortality. She's not alone. She's not facing the end as an isolated individual. She has someone who knows her completely, who shares her memories, who will be there as her time runs short. This relationship allows her to think about death without the terror that often accompanies it. She knows she's loved. She knows she matters to someone. She knows that her life has been witnessed and valued. These simple facts make an enormous difference in how you approach the end of that life. Her continued work also plays a role. Lumley isn't retired, sitting around waiting for death. She's still earning significant money, still taking on projects, still contributing. This gives her days structure and purpose. It keeps her mind active and engaged. It connects her to the world in meaningful ways. Work, for all its frustrations and demands, provides something essential, a reason to get up in the morning, a sense that you still have something to offer, that your presence in the world still matters. As long as Lumley is working, she's not just waiting to die. She's living purposefully, which is exactly what her philosophy demands. The champagne ritual deserves special attention because it's such a perfect encapsulation of her approach. Everyday champagne. Not wine, not beer, not a sensible glass of water. Champagne, the drink of celebration, of luxury, of special occasions. By making it a daily ritual, Lumley is declaring that every day is a special occasion, that ordinary time deserves to be celebrated, that the distinction between regular days and special days is artificial and limiting. She's not drinking to get drunk, not using alcohol to escape reality. She's using this ritual to remind herself that being alive, even on the most mundane Tuesday, is worth celebrating. It's a small act that carries enormous philosophical weight. Critics might argue that Lumley's attitude is only possible because of her privilege, that it's easy to be philosophical about death when you've lived a life of fame, fortune, adventure, and recognition. There's some truth to this. Not everyone has had the opportunities Lumley has had. Not everyone can afford champagne every day or travel the world or fight for causes they believe in. Not everyone has loving relationships, fulfilling work, and the satisfaction of a life well lived. For people whose lives have been marked by poverty, abuse, discrimination, or tragedy, accepting death might be far more complicated, might involve more grief for the life that never was, more anger at opportunities denied. But dismissing Lumley's perspective as merely a product of privilege misses something important. Yes, she's been fortunate, but she's also made deliberate choices about how to live. She chose activism over comfortable celebrity. She chose adventurous travel over safe luxury. She chose to use her platform for causes larger than herself. She chose to keep working, keep exploring, keep engaging rather than retreating into comfortable retirement. She chose to face her mortality head-on rather than hiding from it. These choices were available to her partly because of privilege, but making them still required courage, wisdom, and a particular kind of fierce determination to extract meaning from existence. Moreover, her message isn't really about having a glamorous life. It's about approaching whatever life you have with full engagement, with gratitude for what you've been given, with acceptance of what you cannot change. That philosophy works whether you're a famous actress or someone living a much more ordinary existence. You don't need champagne specifically. You need something that reminds you to celebrate being alive. You don't need to travel the world. You need to approach your own sphere of existence with curiosity and openness. You don't need to win activism campaigns. You need to connect to something larger than yourself. The specifics of Lumley's life are unique, but the underlying approach is universal. The timing of Lumley's reflections on mortality is also significant. We're living through a period of massive societal anxiety about death. The recent pandemic made mortality visceral and omnipresent in ways it hadn't been for decades. We watched death tolls climb, attended funerals via video conference, experienced collective grief on a scale that challenged our ability to process it. And yet, paradoxically, we're also living in an era of unprecedented life extension, where medical technology promises to keep pushing death further into the future. This creates a strange tension, where death is both more present and more denied than ever before. We're simultaneously confronted with it constantly and desperately trying to pretend it's not coming for us. Into this confused landscape steps Joanna Lumley, offering a different way of thinking. She's not denying death or trying to postpone it indefinitely. She's not paralyzed by fear of it. She's accepting it as the inevitable conclusion of life and using that acceptance to live more fully in whatever time remains. This message resonates precisely because it cuts through our cultural confusion. It offers a middle path between denial and despair, a way of facing mortality that is honest without being morbid, accepting without being fatalistic. There's something deeply countercultural about Lumley's whole approach. Modern life is built around distraction, around keeping us so busy and entertained and stimulated that we never have to think about fundamental questions like meaning, purpose, and mortality. We're encouraged to define ourselves through consumption, through accumulating experiences and possessions, through maintaining our social media presence. The idea of pausing to consider that all of this ends, that none of it accompanies us beyond death, that the self we're so busy constructing will eventually cease to exist, is profoundly uncomfortable. It's easier to just keep scrolling, keep buying, keep distracting ourselves until death catches us by surprise. Lumley is doing the opposite. She's looking directly at death, thinking about it clearly, making decisions based on that knowledge. This isn't morbid. It's honest. And it allows her to live differently than she would if she were pretending death wasn't approaching. She's prioritizing differently, valuing experiences over possessions, relationships over achievements, meaning over status. She's letting go of things that don't matter and holding tight to things that do. She's saying no to things that would waste her remaining time and yes to things that will enrich whatever days she has left. This is what accepting mortality actually looks like when it's done well, not dark and depressing, but clarifying and liberating. One of the most powerful aspects of Lumley's public discussion of her mortality is that it gives others permission to have these conversations. In most social contexts, talking about your own death is taboo, considered inappropriate or attention-seeking or depressing. We're supposed to pretend we'll live forever, or at least not mention the alternative. But this silence has costs. It means people don't communicate their wishes about end-of-life care. It means families are torn apart trying to guess what a dying person would have wanted. It means people die in ways they wouldn't have chosen because they never clearly stated their preferences. It means we never get to say the things that matter most because bringing up death feels like giving up or being morbid. By speaking openly about her approach to mortality, Lumley is modeling a different way. She's showing that you can discuss death without being macabre, that you can make your wishes known while still fully engaged in living, that thinking about the end doesn't mean you've given up on the present. She's making space for others to have these conversations, to think through their own values and preferences, to communicate with loved ones about something difficult but essential. This is a genuine gift to public discourse, a demonstration of how celebrity can be used to shift cultural conversations in healthier directions. The question of legacy inevitably arises when discussing someone who's thinking about their mortality. What will Joanna Lumley leave behind? How will she be remembered? The obvious answer is through her work. Patsy Stone will entertain audiences for as long as people watch television comedy. The new Avengers reruns will keep Purdey alive for future generations. Her travel documentaries will continue showing viewers parts of the world they might never see in person. Her films and television appearances across 6 decades create a massive body of work that documents not just her talents, but the evolution of British entertainment. But perhaps her more important legacy is less tangible. It's the Gurkhas who can live in Britain because she fought for them. It's the animals who suffered less because she advocated for their welfare. It's the causes she supported that received attention because she lent them her name. It's the example she set of using fame for more than just personal enrichment. It's the model she's providing now of how to face death with honesty and grace. These things don't win awards or generate box office receipts, but they matter more than most things that do. There's also the legacy of simply living well, of showing others what a fully engaged life looks like. Lumley has followed her curiosity wherever it led. She's taken risks, both in her career and in her activism. She's maintained her principles, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. She's kept learning, kept exploring, kept growing well into her 70s. She's proved that women don't become invisible after 50, that age can bring authority and confidence rather than diminishing relevance. She's modeled a kind of British femininity that is tough and glamorous, principled and fun-loving, serious and joyful all at once. These examples matter, especially in a culture that gives women so few models for aging with power and purpose intact. As Lumley enters what she acknowledges will likely be her final years, the question becomes what comes next? She shows no signs of slowing down dramatically. She's still working, still taking on projects that interest her. She's still traveling when opportunities arise. She's still speaking out about causes she cares about. The difference now is that all of this is happening with the full knowledge that it's temporary, that each project might be the last, that every trip is one more adventure before the traveling stops. This knowledge could make everything feel desperate or sad, but Lumley seems to be experiencing the opposite effect. Everything feels more precious, more meaningful, more worth savoring because she knows it's finite. There's a Buddhist concept that Lumley's approach resembles, the idea that contemplating death isn't morbid but essential, that only by facing mortality can you truly appreciate life. Buddhist monks meditate on death, contemplate corpses, keep their own mortality at the front of their minds precisely because it helps them remain present, grateful, and focused on what actually matters. Lumley isn't a Buddhist, and she's arriving at this wisdom through her own path, but the result is similar. By accepting that she doesn't have much time left, she's making the time she does have more valuable, more conscious, more fully lived. Her statement about not worrying about health is particularly interesting because it challenges the modern obsession with longevity at all costs. We're bombarded with messages about what we should eat, how we should exercise, what supplements we should take, all in service of living as long as possible. The underlying assumption is that a longer life is always better, that we should sacrifice present pleasure for future years. But Lumley is questioning this assumption. She's asking whether adding a few years to your lifespan is worth it if those years come at the cost of daily enjoyment, if they require constant vigilance and self-denial, if they turn living into a project focused on not dying. She's suggesting that maybe, just maybe, enjoying champagne every day and living to 79 is preferable to drinking kale smoothies and making it to 85. This isn't advocating for reckless, unhealthy behavior. It's questioning where the balance point lies between longevity and quality, between future years and present enjoyment. The champagne also serves another purpose. It's a small act of rebellion against the Puritan strain in modern wellness culture that treats pleasure itself as suspicious, as something to be carefully rationed and controlled. There's a joylessness to a lot of contemporary health advice, a sense that virtue lies in denying yourself, that the proper relationship to your body is one of strict discipline and limitation. Lumley's daily champagne is a gentle middle finger to this whole attitude. She's saying that pleasure for its own sake is worthwhile, that celebration doesn't need to wait for a special occasion, that denying yourself joy in the name of health is missing the point of being alive. Again, she's not advocating excess or addiction. She's advocating for not letting fear of death rob you of the small pleasures that make life worth living. When Lumley says she wouldn't mind assisted dying if she reached a state where she couldn't talk or eat without help, she's touching on one of the most controversial and important ethical questions of our time. As medical technology advances, we've become very good at keeping bodies alive long past the point where the person inhabiting that body has any quality of life. We can sustain biological existence through feeding tubes and ventilators and medications, but we haven't developed a clear consensus about when we should stop, about when existence becomes mere survival rather than actual living. Different people will draw this line differently, and that's appropriate. But Lumley is drawing her line clearly. She values communication and basic autonomy to the point that life without them wouldn't be worth sustaining. This isn't suicidal thinking. It's the opposite. It's someone who values life so much that she wants to exit while it's still recognizably life, rather than persisting into a diminished state that doesn't meet her own definition of living. This position requires courage because it invites judgment. Some people will see it as giving up, as not fighting hard enough, as surrendering to death rather than battling until the end. Others will see it as sensible, dignified, and consistent with a life lived on her own terms. By stating her position publicly, Lumley is opening herself up to both responses. But she's doing it anyway because she believes the conversation is important, because she wants to contribute to changing laws and attitudes around end-of-life choices. This is activism of a different sort than her Gurkha campaign, more personal, more controversial, but no less important. Her description of being near the top of the hill is such a perfect metaphor. Life as a mountain climb, struggling upward through childhood, adolescence, early adulthood, middle age, finally reaching a peak of experience, wisdom, achievement. And then the recognition that from the peak, there's only one direction to go. You can't stay at the summit forever. Eventually, you start the descent. For most people, this realization is terrifying, a recognition that the best is behind you, that everything from here is diminishment and loss. But Lumley seems to be approaching the descent differently, with gratitude for having reached the summit, with appreciation for the view from the top, with acceptance that descending is simply the natural completion of the climb. The metaphor works because it acknowledges both the reality of decline and the possibility of doing it with grace. What would Patsy Stone think of all this? The character Lumley created would be horrified. Patsy denied aging, rejected mortality, lived in perpetual delusion that she was still 25. She would see Lumley's acceptance as weakness, as giving up, as betraying everything Patsy stood for. And yet, watching Absolutely Fabulous, you could always see the fear underneath Patsy's denial. The cosmetic procedures weren't empowering. They were desperate. The alcohol and drugs weren't celebration. They were anesthesia. The refusal to acknowledge aging wasn't confidence. It was terror. Patsy was funny because she was so human in her weakness, so recognizable in her fear. Joanna Lumley, in choosing the opposite path, is showing what it looks like to face those same fears and refuse to let them control you. She's showing Patsy's alternative ending, the one where you stop running from mortality and turn to face it on your own terms. The contrast between Patsy's life and Joanna's life is also instructive. Patsy was all surface, all style, all consumption. She defined herself through designer labels and exclusive parties and being seen in the right places. She had no inner life that we could see, no principles beyond pleasure-seeking, no connections to anything larger than herself. This made her hilarious but also tragic. We laughed at her because we recognized the emptiness underneath the glamour. Joanna Lumley has lived the opposite kind of life, style and glamour, yes, but also substance, principles, connections to causes and communities and ideas larger than herself. She hasn't just accumulated experiences. She's built meaning. And that's what allows her to face death without the terror that would consume someone like Patsy. When your life has substance, when you've connected to things that will outlast you, when you've made contributions that matter, death is sad but not terrifying. You've already transcended mortality by being part of something ongoing. There's a generation gap worth noting in how people are responding to Lumley's statements about mortality. Older people, particularly those who have themselves faced serious illness or the death of loved ones, generally respond with recognition and approval. They understand what she's saying because they've arrived at similar places themselves. They appreciate her honesty because it gives voice to thoughts they've had but perhaps haven't articulated. They see her acceptance not as giving up but as wisdom hard-earned through living. Younger people often have more complicated reactions. Some are inspired by her approach, seeing it as a model for how they might face their own mortality decades in the future. Others are uncomfortable, not ready to contemplate death when it still feels distant and abstract. And some misinterpret her acceptance as depression, not understanding that you can acknowledge death without being consumed by it. This generational difference points to something larger about how we relate to mortality at different life stages. When you're young, death is theoretical, something that happens to other people, especially old people, but not to you. You know intellectually that you'll die someday, but that day seems so far away that it has no practical impact on how you live. As you age, death becomes more real. Friends die. Parents die. Your own body starts showing signs of wear and decline. Suddenly, mortality isn't theoretical. It's a concrete approaching reality that demands response. Lumley at 79 has necessarily grappled with death in ways that someone at 29 probably hasn't. Her perspective reflects not just her individual choices, but the life stage she occupies. And importantly, she's sharing that perspective, allowing younger people to learn from her experience, rather than having to wait until they're in their 70s to start thinking clearly about mortality. Of course, none of us knows how we'll actually respond when death moves from approaching reality to immediate presence. It's one thing to philosophize about accepting mortality when you're still healthy and functional. It's quite another to maintain that acceptance when you're actually dying, when the abstract becomes concrete, when the approaching becomes present. Lumley might find that her equanimity falters when faced with the actual end. She might discover reserves of fear or anger she didn't know she possessed. Or she might maintain her acceptance all the way through, dying as she's lived, on her own terms with full awareness. We won't know until it happens, and even then it will be private, known only to her and those closest to her. But the philosophy she's articulating now still matters, still provides value, regardless of how perfectly she's able to embody it when the time comes. As we consider Joanna Lumley's journey toward her inevitable death, certain themes keep emerging. Courage, not in the sense of fearlessness, but in the sense of facing fear and moving forward anyway. Acceptance, not as resignation, but as clear-eyed recognition of reality. Gratitude for what has been rather than resentment about what won't be. Connection to things larger than oneself, causes and communities and ideas that provide meaning beyond individual existence. Pleasure as a form of celebration rather than escape. Honesty about difficult topics rather than comfortable denial. These aren't just philosophical abstracts. They're practical approaches to living well and dying well. Lessons Lumley has learned through 7 decades of fully engaged existence. The ultimate question her example raises is, how should we live given that we're all going to die? It's the oldest philosophical question, the one that every religion and philosophy and wisdom tradition has tried to answer. Joanna Lumley isn't claiming to have the definitive answer. She's not a philosopher or a spiritual teacher. She's an actress, activist, and traveler who's sharing her own approach as she faces her own mortality. But her answer is compelling precisely because it's practical and livable. She's not advocating monastic self-denial or hedonistic excess. She's advocating for full engagement with life as it is, with clear awareness of its finite nature, with deliberate choices about how to spend the time you have. She's showing that you can be realistic about death without being morbid, celebratory about life without being in denial, intentional about your choices without being rigid or joyless. Her legacy, ultimately, will be defined by others after she's gone. But from where we stand now, watching her navigate her late 70s with grace and honesty and continuing vitality, it seems clear that she's provided several important gifts. She's given us decades of entertainment, from Purdey's high kicks to Patsy's alcoholic escapades to her infectious enthusiasm for the world's wonders. She's given us successful activism that changed people's lives for the better. She's given us a model for using fame to serve causes larger than yourself. She's given us an example of aging as a woman without losing power or relevance or visibility. And now, she's giving us a model for facing mortality with acceptance, courage, and grace. These are gifts worth celebrating, worth examining, worth learning from. So here's where we stand. Joanna Lumley at 79, still drinking her daily champagne, still working, still engaged with the world, but also clearly aware that her time is limited. She's not running from death. She's not paralyzed by it. She's living deliberately and fully in whatever time remains, with clear priorities and firm values and genuine joy. She's showing us that the shadow of mortality doesn't have to darken life. It can actually illuminate it, helping us see more clearly what matters and what doesn't, what's worth our limited time and what isn't. She's demonstrating that acceptance and celebration aren't opposites but partners, that you can toast your remaining days with champagne precisely because you know they're numbered. This is the essential paradox that Joanna Lumley embodies. The closer you get to death, the more precious life becomes. The more clearly you acknowledge that time is finite, the more intentionally you can choose how to spend it. The less you deny mortality, the more fully you can live. She's not bracing for death in the sense of cowering in fear or defensive preparation. She's bracing for it in the sense of steadying herself, strengthening her stance, preparing to meet it upright with eyes open. And in the meantime, in whatever years or months or days remain, she's showing us what it looks like to live without illusion, without denial, with full awareness of both life's beauty and its brevity. When Joanna Lumley finally does die, whether that's next year or a decade from now, she'll leave behind more than just a body of work. She'll leave behind an example of how to live fully across 7 or 8 decades, an example of how to use privilege and platform for good, an example of how to remain curious and adventurous regardless of age, an example of how to stand up for principles even when it's difficult, an example of how to age with dignity and power intact, and crucially, an example of how to face mortality without either denying its reality or being consumed by fear of it. These examples matter more than most of us realize. They provide models for others to follow, templates for how to navigate life's challenges, proof that certain approaches to existence are not just theoretically possible, but actually livable. So as Joanna Lumley continues her descent from the mountaintop, she does so with champagne in hand, causes in her heart, memories of adventures stretching back 7 decades, and a clear-eyed awareness that the journey is approaching its natural end. She's not fighting the inevitable. She's accepting it while still fully engaged with life. She's not bitter about what she won't live to see. She's grateful for what she's experienced. She's not afraid of death. She's determined to live well right up until it arrives. And in sharing this journey publicly, in talking honestly about mortality when most celebrities pretend they'll live forever, she's providing something valuable to all of us who will eventually walk the same path. She's showing us it can be done with grace, with courage, with acceptance, and yes, with daily champagne. And that's a lesson worth learning, a model worth following, and a gift worth celebrating while we still can.